Most people think their suffering comes from the world around them, but most suffering begins in the mind. It's replaying a conversation from 3 months ago, worrying about something that hasn't even happened yet, criticizing you for a mistake you've already apologized for 100 times. And the most painful part isn't even the thoughts themselves, it's that feeling of complete helplessness, like your own mind has become somewhere you no longer feel safe being alone. You didn't choose this. Nobody chooses this. But somewhere along the way, without any single moment you can point to, the mind started running on its own. And now it feels like no matter what you try, no matter how many times you journal, distract yourself, tell yourself to just breathe and move on, the toxic thoughts find their way back. Sometimes quieter, sometimes louder and more convincing than ever before. But what if the problem was never your life? What if the problem is the way your mind has been trained to see it? And what if the suffering you've been carrying is not something you need to fight, but something you need to finally, honestly understand? Because the moment you see clearly what the mind has been doing, not with judgment, not with shame, but with real clarity, something in you begins to breathe again. This is not about becoming a different person. It is about returning to the person you were before the noise took over, before the toxic thoughts convinced you they were the truth, before you forgot what it felt like to simply be at peace inside your own mind. If this feels familiar, if you are tired, genuinely and deeply tired, of living inside a mind that feels more like a storm than a sanctuary, then stay with this. Because what you are about to hear has the power to do something that no quick fix, no cheap dopamine, no distraction, no amount of staying busy ever could. It won't just help you understand why your mind works this way. It will gently, slowly, and permanently help you find your way back to yourself. And that journey begins right now. 1. Notice how the mind tricks you. The mind is constantly active, producing an endless stream of thoughts, judgments, fears, memories, predictions, and imaginary scenarios. This happens so quickly and automatically that most of the time you don't even notice it. But the real issue isn't that thoughts appear. The real issue is how quickly you believe them. A single negative thought can arise, something small, almost insignificant, and within seconds, your mind builds an entire story around it. This will fail. I'm not good enough. People are judging me. Before you even realize what's happening, you're emotionally affected. Your mood shifts, your body reacts, and suddenly, that one thought feels like reality. You don't question it. You don't examine it. You simply accept it. This is the mind's greatest trick. It takes something temporary and makes it feel permanent, something imaginary and makes it feel real, something impersonal and makes it feel like it defines you. But in truth, a thought is just a mental event. It is not a fact, not a command, and not a reflection of who you are. It only gains power when you attach meaning to it. Buddhist teachings describe the mind as a kind of illusionist, constantly creating stories that feel convincing, but often have no real substance. The problem is not the presence of thoughts, but your identification with them. The moment you believe every thought, you become trapped inside the stories your mind creates. The shift begins when you learn to observe instead of react. Instead of instantly believing a thought, you pause and recognize it for what it is, just a thought. You can say to yourself, this is a thought appearing in the mind. It is not necessarily true. This simple awareness creates space between you and the thought. Think of your thoughts like clouds passing through the sky. Some are light and harmless, others are dark and heavy. But no matter how intense they seem, they all pass. The sky is never harmed by the clouds, just as your awareness is never harmed by your thoughts. The only time clouds seem overwhelming is when you forget you are the sky and start identifying with them. When you stop reacting automatically and start observing, something powerful happens. The thought loses its grip. It no longer pulls you into a story or controls your emotions in the same way. You begin to see patterns, how your mind repeats the same fears, the same doubts, the same narratives again and again. Over time, this awareness weakens the influence of toxic thinking. You stop treating every thought as important. You stop assuming your mind is always right. And most importantly, you stop letting your thoughts define your reality. Recognizing the mind's tricks is the first step toward freedom, because once you see clearly how the mind operates, you are no longer controlled by it. You move from being lost in thought to being aware of it, and that awareness changes everything. 2. Your pain is not permanent. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is understanding that nothing you experience, no thought, no emotion, no situation is permanent. Everything is in constant motion. Yet the mind has a habit of convincing you otherwise. When a difficult thought or feeling appears, it immediately tells you, this is how it will always be. And the moment you believe that, suffering begins. You feel anxious, and the mind says, this won't go away. You feel low, and it tells you, this is who I am now. But this is an illusion. Emotions rise, stay for a while, and then pass just like waves in the ocean. The problem is not the wave itself, but the belief that it will never end. Buddhist wisdom teaches that all experiences are temporary. Thoughts come and go, feelings change. Even the most intense emotional states eventually dissolve if you stop feeding them with resistance and fear. When you truly understand this, your relationship with your mind shifts. Instead of panicking when something uncomfortable arises, you begin to observe it with patience. You realize that you don't need to fight every negative thought or force every uncomfortable feeling to disappear. In fact, trying to control them often makes them stronger. What weakens them is space, allowing them to exist without clinging to them. Think of your mind like the sky, and your thoughts and emotions like weather passing through it. Some days are calm and clear, others are stormy and intense. But no storm lasts forever, and no cloud can stay fixed in place. The sky remains unchanged, no matter what passes through it. When you remember that everything is temporary, the intensity of your thoughts begins to fade. You stop treating them as permanent truths and start seeing them as passing moments. This creates a sense of distance. You are no longer drowning in your thoughts, you are watching them. This doesn't mean you become passive or indifferent. It means you become wise. You stop reacting impulsively and start responding with clarity. You understand that even the most uncomfortable feelings will change, and that gives you the strength to stay steady. Realizing impermanence frees you from the fear of your own mind. You stop believing that every thought defines your future. You stop assuming that every emotion will last forever. And in that space, something powerful emerges, a quiet confidence that no matter what arises, it will pass. And when you truly see that everything is temporary, you stop holding on so tightly. You let thoughts come and go. You let emotions rise and fall. And in doing so, you begin to experience a deeper sense of calm, because you are no longer trying to control what was never meant to stay. 3. Break the habit of constant stimulation. Think about the last time you sat in complete silence. No phone, no music, no television humming in the background, no podcast filling the quiet, just you and your own thoughts, with nothing between you and them. For most people, that memory is either very distant or strangely uncomfortable, because somewhere along the way, without really deciding to, we stopped being able to be alone with ourselves. And instead of noticing that, we just kept reaching for the next thing to fill the space. This is the age of constant stimulation, and it is quietly destroying our ability to think clearly. The Buddha lived in a world that was incomparably quieter than ours, and even then he recognized the danger of a mind that was always chasing the next sensation. He called it tanha, a Pali word that means craving, thirst, the endless reaching for something outside yourself to make the inside feel better. He taught that this constant reaching was not satisfaction, it was the cause of deeper dissatisfaction. Because every time you outsource your inner peace to something external, you train your mind to believe it cannot survive without it. And a mind that believes it cannot survive stillness will do anything to avoid it, including drowning itself in toxic thoughts just to stay occupied. Here is what nobody tells you about constant stimulation. It doesn't just distract you from toxic thoughts, it actually feeds them. Every time you pick up your phone, the moment discomfort arrives. Every time you turn on something loud, the second the room gets too quiet, you are teaching your mind that stillness is dangerous, that silence is something to escape from. And so, the mind, trying to protect you, fills every available moment with noise, worry, overthinking, self-criticism, endless mental chatter. The stimulation and the toxic thoughts become a cycle, each one feeding the other, until focus feels like something that belongs to someone else entirely. Breaking this habit doesn't require dramatic withdrawal or monastic silence. It begins with something almost embarrassingly small, choosing once a day to sit with nothing, no input, no distraction. Just your breath and whatever thoughts arrive without invitation. At first it feels uncomfortable, even unbearable. That discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that your mind is finally being asked to do something it has forgotten how to do, simply be present without needing to be entertained. Slowly, in that stillness, something remarkable begins to happen. The toxic thoughts that once felt overwhelming start to lose their urgency. The mind, no longer constantly flooded with external noise, begins to find its own natural rhythm again. Clarity returns not all at once, but in quiet moments, like gaps of blue sky appearing between clouds after a long storm. Your focus was never truly lost. It was simply buried under everything you kept pouring on top of it. And the moment you stop filling every silence, you give it the space it needs to find its way back to the surface. 4. Train your mind to stay present. Your attention is your most valuable resource, yet most people have never trained it. It gets pulled in every direction by thoughts, distractions, emotions, and external noise. One moment you're focused, the next you're lost in a memory, a worry, or something on your phone. This scattered attention is not a flaw, it's an untrained mind. Mindfulness is the practice of taking your attention back. It means deliberately placing your awareness on the present moment and gently bringing it back whenever it wanders. Not forcefully, not with frustration, but with calm consistency. A simple way to begin is by focusing on your breath. Notice the sensation of breathing in and out. Within seconds, your mind will drift. That's natural. The key is what you do next. Instead of getting annoyed or following the thought, you return your attention to the breath. Each return is the training. Over time, this practice strengthens your ability to stay present. You begin to notice thoughts as they arise instead of getting pulled into them. You see distractions earlier. You become aware of emotions before they take over. This creates space to choose your response instead of reacting automatically. Mindfulness is not about stopping thoughts. It's about changing your relationship with them. Thoughts will continue to appear, but they no longer control your attention in the same way. You observe them, acknowledge them, and let them pass. As your attention becomes steadier, your mind becomes clearer. You're less reactive, less overwhelmed, and more grounded in the present. Even in difficult moments, you have the ability to stay aware instead of getting lost. Training attention takes patience. Some days, your mind will feel calm, other days, chaotic. That's part of the process. What matters is consistency. Every time you bring your attention back, you are strengthening it. In a world full of distractions, a trained mind is rare and powerful. Because when you can control your attention, you begin to gain control over your experience. And that's where real clarity and stability begin. 5. Detach from your thoughts. One of the deepest reasons people remain trapped in toxic thinking is because they unconsciously believe every thought belongs to them. The moment a thought appears, they assume it is personal, meaningful, and true. A fearful thought arises, and they immediately feel threatened. A self-critical thought appears, and they take it as a reflection of who they are. This is where suffering begins, not in the thought itself, but in the attachment to it. Most people never question the voice in their head. They hear a thought and instantly identify with it. I'm not enough. I always fail. Something is wrong with me. These thoughts are accepted as truth, not because they are accurate, but because they feel familiar, and familiarity is powerful. The mind repeats certain patterns so often that they begin to feel like identity. But a thought is not identity. A thought is an event. It is a temporary movement in the mind, not a permanent statement about who you are. The problem is that most people do not observe thoughts as passing mental activity. They personalize them, they absorb them, they become them. This is why toxic thoughts feel so heavy. It is not because they are powerful on their own, but because you keep treating them as if they are describing you. A thought says, "I'm weak," and instead of seeing it as mental noise, you wear it like a label. A thought says, "I'm broken," and instead of recognizing it as passing fear, you build an identity around it. The thought gains weight because you give it ownership. Detaching from your thoughts means breaking this unconscious habit. It means learning to see thoughts as appearances in the mind, not definitions of the self. The thought may still arise, but you no longer step inside it. You no longer let it tell you who you are. This does not mean suppressing thoughts or pretending they do not exist. Detachment is not denial. It is clear observation without identification. You are not trying to force the mind to become silent. You are learning to stop treating every thought as a personal message. There is a difference between saying, "I am anxious," and "anxiety is arising." One creates identity, the other creates awareness. One fuses you with the experience, the other allows you to observe it. This shift may seem small, but it changes everything. The moment you stop saying "this is me" and begin seeing "this is a thought," the emotional grip begins to weaken. The thought may still appear, but it no longer carries the same authority. It is no longer a command. It is no longer a verdict. It is simply something passing through awareness. Imagine sitting beside a road, watching cars pass. Each car is a thought. Some are loud, some aggressive, some familiar, some unsettling. Most people chase every car. They run into the road, grab onto one, and let it drag them wherever it goes. Detachment means staying where you are and watching each one pass. You notice it, you do not follow it. This is how freedom begins. The mind will continue producing thoughts. That is what it does. It generates reactions, memories, fears, judgments, and fantasies based on habit and conditioning. But not everything the mind produces deserves your belief. Not every thought deserves attention. And not every mental movement deserves to become part of your identity. When you detach from your thoughts, you stop feeding them with emotional investment. You stop arguing with them. You stop trying to prove them wrong. You stop building stories around them. And because you stop feeding them, they begin to lose momentum. What once felt overwhelming starts to feel predictable. You begin to recognize the same patterns repeating in different forms, the same fear, the same doubt, the same inner voice wearing a different mask. And once you see that clearly, it becomes harder to take it seriously. Detachment gives you distance. Distance gives you clarity. And clarity weakens the illusion that every thought is important. Over time, this changes your entire inner world. Thoughts still appear, but they pass faster. They lose their emotional weight. They stop defining your mood, your identity, and your sense of self. You become less reactive, less burdened, and less controlled by the constant noise of the mind. You begin to realize something liberating. Your thoughts are not who you are. They are passing events, nothing more. And the moment you stop identifying with them, they begin to lose the power they once had over you. That is what it means to detach. Not to stop thinking, but to stop becoming everything the mind says. 6. Replace reaction with investigation. Most people do not suffer because of what they think. They suffer because of how quickly they react to what they think. A thought appears, and before there is even a moment of awareness, the reaction has already begun. Fear appears, and the body tightens. Doubt appears, and the mind begins spiraling. A painful memory surfaces, and emotion takes over instantly. This happens so fast that it feels automatic, almost invisible. But this automatic reaction is where suffering is strengthened. The untrained mind reacts before it understands. It assumes every thought must be answered, every emotion must be obeyed, every discomfort must be escaped. This creates a cycle that repeats endlessly. A thought triggers a reaction, the reaction fuels emotion, the emotion creates more thoughts, and the cycle continues until the mind is completely trapped inside its own momentum. The problem is rarely the original thought. The real problem is the immediate reaction that follows it. This is why one of the most important shifts you can make is replacing reaction with investigation. Instead of instantly obeying what appears in the mind, you begin to examine it. Instead of reacting unconsciously, you become curious. Instead of collapsing into the experience, you turn toward it with awareness. This changes everything. Reaction is blind. Investigation is conscious. Reaction is impulsive. Investigation is deliberate. Reaction pulls you deeper into the thought. Investigation creates distance from it. The moment you investigate a thought, you interrupt its control. When a toxic thought appears, the usual habit is to react immediately. You resist it, fear it, argue with it, or try to escape it. But each of these responses strengthens the thought because they treat it as important. Investigation does the opposite. It removes the automatic emotional charge and replaces it with attention. Instead of asking, "How do I make this stop?" ask, "What is this?" That question shifts you from panic into awareness. What does this thought actually feel like in the body? Where is the tension? Is it in the chest, the stomach, the throat? Is it sharp, heavy, hot, restless? What happens if you do not respond to it immediately? What changes if you simply observe it? These questions are not meant to create more thinking. They are meant to create direct observation. And direct observation changes your relationship with the experience. The moment you begin investigating a thought, you stop being fully identified with it. You are no longer trapped inside the reaction. You are now watching it unfold. That distance is powerful. It breaks the illusion that the thought is urgent, dangerous, or absolute. You begin to notice something important. Thoughts are not solid. They are not fixed. They move. They shift. They rise, peak, and fade. The more closely you observe them, the less substantial they appear. This is what reaction hides and investigation reveals. When you react automatically, the mind stays unconscious. It repeats the same patterns without interruption. But when you investigate, those patterns become visible. You start seeing how certain thoughts trigger certain emotions, how certain fears create predictable reactions, how the same inner loops keep repeating in different forms. And once a pattern becomes visible, it begins to lose power. What once felt overwhelming starts to feel mechanical, familiar, predictable. You begin to see that many of your strongest reactions are not truth, they are conditioning. This is where freedom begins. Investigation turns unconscious suffering into conscious awareness. It interrupts the cycle before it gains momentum. It teaches you to look directly at what the mind is doing instead of being controlled by it. And the more clearly you observe, the less power your thoughts have to manipulate you. Reaction keeps you trapped inside the mind. Investigation allows you to step outside it. 7. Let go to achieve true focus. Most people think focus is something you force. They believe concentration comes from effort, pressure, and mental strain. So they try harder. They tense their body, narrow their attention, and fight every distraction as if focus is something to be conquered through force. But the harder they push, the more scattered the mind becomes. This is the mistake. True focus is not created through force. It is revealed when unnecessary mental noise is removed. The mind is naturally capable of clarity, but most people never experience it because their attention is constantly being pulled in too many directions. Thoughts, distractions, urges, unfinished worries, emotional reactions, constant stimulation, each one pulls at attention until the mind becomes too crowded to settle. This is why forcing focus rarely works. The problem is not that the mind is weak. The problem is that it is overloaded. You do not create focus by adding more pressure. You create it by removing what disturbs it. This is where letting go becomes essential. Letting go is not laziness. It is not passivity. It is the deliberate act of releasing what the mind does not need. It means dropping the urge to chase every thought, react to every feeling, or follow every distraction. It means loosening your grip on mental noise so attention can settle naturally. The mind is like water. When it is constantly disturbed, it becomes impossible to see clearly. The surface shakes, the reflection breaks, and everything appears distorted. But when disturbance stops, the water settles on its own. Clarity is not forced. It appears naturally when agitation ends. This is how focus works. The more you cling, the more restless the mind becomes. The more you grasp at thoughts, distractions, and impulses, the less stable your attention becomes. But when you stop feeding every mental movement, something begins to change. The mind becomes lighter, less reactive, less crowded, and in that space, focus begins to emerge. Most distraction is not random, it is attachment in motion. Every urge to check your phone, every impulse to escape discomfort, every need to shift attention is the mind reaching for stimulation. The problem is not the distraction itself. The problem is the habit of obeying it. Letting go breaks that habit. You notice the impulse, but you do not follow it. You feel the urge, but you do not obey it. You let the distraction appear without giving it your attention. And each time you do this, the mind becomes a little less restless. This is how concentration is trained, not by forcing the mind into silence, but by refusing to feed what keeps it noisy. Over time, attention becomes steadier. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer pull you as easily. Distractions still arise, but they lose their urgency. The mind stops chasing everything that moves. And when that happens, focus stops feeling like effort. It becomes natural. This is the deeper truth. Focus is not something you manufacture. It is what remains when distraction is no longer being fed. The mind does not become clear because you forced it into submission. It becomes clear because you stopped interfering with its natural stability. This is why letting go creates real focus. It removes the friction. It quiets the noise. It frees attention from constant interruption. And when attention is no longer being dragged in every direction, the mind becomes steady, clear, and deeply concentrated. That is true focus, not force, not strain, but the calm power of a mind that no longer chases everything. 8. Transform awareness into discipline and consistent practice. Awareness can change your life, but only if it becomes something more than a temporary insight. Many people experience moments of clarity. They notice their thoughts. They understand their patterns. They feel a brief sense of freedom and believe something has changed. But then the old habits return. The same reactions reappear. The same mental loops regain control. Not because awareness failed, but because awareness alone is not enough. Insight is powerful, but without discipline, it fades. A single moment of understanding can show you the truth, but only consistent practice can make that truth stable. This is where most people fall back into old patterns. They think seeing the problem is the same as solving it. It is not. Recognition is the beginning. Repetition is what creates change. The mind does not transform because you understand it once. It transforms because you train it repeatedly. This is why discipline matters. Discipline is what turns awareness into something reliable. It takes what you briefly understood in a clear moment and strengthens it until it becomes the way you live. Without discipline, awareness remains fragile. It appears when conditions are calm and disappears the moment life becomes difficult. But when awareness is trained consistently, it becomes stable, even under pressure. That is when real change begins. Most people wait to practice only when they feel overwhelmed. They try to become aware in the middle of stress, fear, anger, or anxiety. But if awareness has not been trained in ordinary moments, it will not remain steady in difficult ones. You cannot expect calm under pressure if you have never practiced calm in stillness. This is why Buddhist practice has always emphasized consistency over intensity. Small acts, repeated daily, are more powerful than rare moments of extreme effort. A few minutes of real observation each day changes the mind more than occasional bursts of motivation, returning to the breath. Watching a reaction without feeding it, noticing a thought and letting it pass, pausing before speaking, sitting in silence instead of reaching for distraction. These moments seem small, but this is how the mind is retrained. Change is built through repetition. Each time you interrupt an old reaction, you weaken it. Each time you observe a thought without identifying with it, you loosen its hold. Each time you stay present instead of escaping into habit, awareness becomes stronger. This is what discipline truly is. Not punishment, not force, not rigid control. Discipline is the willingness to return again and again, even when it feels inconvenient, repetitive, or uncomfortable. It is the quiet decision to practice what you already know, instead of waiting for a better mood, a better moment, or a stronger motivation. The mind changes when practice becomes non-negotiable. This is where consistency becomes more important than intensity. Intensity is emotional. It rises fast and fades quickly. Consistency is quieter, but far more powerful. It does not depend on mood. It does not wait for inspiration. It continues, whether the mind feels calm or chaotic. That is what gives it strength. A disciplined mind is not a perfect mind. It is a practiced one. Thoughts will still arise, emotions will still move, discomfort will still appear, but now there is stability beneath them. Awareness no longer disappears the moment difficulty arrives. It remains present. It notices, it responds, it holds steady. This is the difference between temporary insight and real transformation. One is a glimpse, the other is a way of being. Over time, consistent practice begins to change the structure of your inner life. Reactions become slower, attention becomes steadier, emotional patterns lose speed, thoughts lose intensity. The space between stimulus and response widens, and in that space, freedom becomes possible. This is how awareness becomes strength. Not through one breakthrough, but through repeated return. Not through inspiration, but through discipline. Not through occasional understanding, but through consistent practice. This is what makes the difference between people who briefly understand their mind and people who truly change their relationship with it. Anyone can feel clear for a moment. Anyone can feel peaceful after insight. But lasting freedom belongs to the person who keeps practicing after the moment passes. That is the real work. To return when it is boring, to return when it is difficult, to return when the mind resists, to return when no one is watching, to return without needing immediate results. This is how awareness matures. This is how clarity becomes character. This is how peace becomes stable. And this is how the mind is transformed, not through one powerful realization, but through the quiet discipline of practicing until awareness is no longer something you visit, but something you live. 9. Awareness is your ultimate freedom. You have traveled a long way to get here, not just through this content, but through everything that brought you to it. The restless nights, the thoughts that wouldn't quiet down, the exhaustion of a mind that felt like it was working against you instead of for you. The moments you sat with your own heaviness and wondered if it was always going to feel this hard. You came here looking for something, and if you have been honest with yourself through each of these teachings, you have already begun to find it. Not out there somewhere, but in the one place it was always quietly waiting. Inside the stillness of your own awareness. And this is where everything arrives. This is where the journey has been pointing all along. The Buddha's final and perhaps most powerful teaching was not just about a method, a habit, or a list of rules to follow. It was about understanding how the mind really works. He called it vipassana, which simply means seeing clearly. The ability to look at your own experience, your thoughts, your emotions, your toxic patterns, and see them exactly as they are. Not as permanent truths, not as definitions of who you are, but as passing events in a consciousness that is, at its deepest level, completely free. Buddha taught that this awareness, this simple, clear, uncluttered seeing, was not something you needed to achieve or earn or become worthy of. It was already there. It has always been there. Underneath every toxic thought, underneath every moment of lost focus, underneath every storm the mind has ever created, the awareness was present, watching, waiting, undamaged and unchanged by everything that passed through it. This is the truth that most of us spend our entire lives circling without ever quite landing on. We look for freedom in the right circumstances, in the perfect mental state, in finally getting rid of every difficult thought and every uncomfortable feeling. We believe, quietly and persistently, that freedom is something that will arrive when everything else is finally fixed. But awareness teaches you something different. It teaches you that freedom is not the absence of difficult thoughts. It is the ability to see them clearly without being consumed by them. It is the space between the thought and your reaction to it. That space, that small, sacred, breathing gap, is where you actually live. And the wider that space becomes through practice, through returning, through the patient daily work of waking up to your own mind, the freer you become, not free from life, free within it. Think about what you are actually capable of now that you weren't capable of when you started. You can notice a toxic thought arriving without immediately believing it. You can feel the pull of a familiar mental pattern and pause before following it. You can sit in silence without immediately reaching for something to fill it. You can watch the mind do its restless, complicated, endlessly creative work and remain, somewhere underneath all of it, steady. That steadiness is not something you built from nothing. It was always the ground beneath your feet. You just learned, slowly and with great patience, how to stop running long enough to feel it. Awareness is not a destination you arrive at and then stay forever. It is something you return to, again and again, in the ordinary moments of an ordinary day, in the middle of a difficult conversation, in the quiet space between waking and sleeping. In the moment a toxic thought rises and you choose, one more time, to see it clearly instead of becoming it. Each return is the practice. Each moment of clear seeing is the freedom. Not a dramatic, permanent, once and for all liberation, but something warmer and more human than that. A freedom that lives in the choosing, in the returning, in the gentle, honest, courageous act of waking up to your own mind every single day and deciding not to be ruled by what you can now so clearly see. You came here because your mind felt heavy, and if you leave with nothing else, leave with this: you are not your thoughts. You never were. You are the awareness behind them. Quiet, clear, and completely free. That awareness was your greatest strength all along. You simply needed to remember that it was there. You made it here. And that matters more than you might realize right now, because most people, when they feel the weight of their own mind pressing down on them, don't turn toward it. They turn away. They find something louder, something brighter, something numbing enough to make the discomfort temporarily disappear. But you stayed. You sat with something uncomfortable and chose to understand it instead of escape it. And that single choice, that quiet, courageous decision to keep going, is already the beginning of everything changing. So let's sit here for just a moment before you go, not to summarize, not to give you a neat list of everything you've learned, but simply to let what has been said settle into you the way rain settles into dry earth, slowly, without force, finding its way down to the roots. You came here carrying something heavy. Maybe it was the exhaustion of a mind that never seemed to quiet down. Maybe it was the frustration of watching your focus slip away no matter how hard you tried to hold on to it. Maybe it was something older and quieter than that, a low hum of inner noise that has been there for so long you had almost accepted it as simply the way things are. And somewhere inside all of that, underneath the toxic thoughts and the lost focus and the sleepless 2M spirals, there was a question you were really asking. Not, how do I fix my mind, but something closer to, is there peace available to someone like me? Is stillness actually possible for a mind as restless and complicated and tired as mine? The answer, offered gently and without any exaggeration, is yes, completely and absolutely yes. But not the peace you might have been imagining, not a permanent state of unbroken calm, where difficult thoughts never arrive, and focus never wavers, and everything inside you is always perfectly still. That kind of peace doesn't exist for human beings, and chasing it only creates a new kind of suffering. The peace that is actually available to you, the peace that Buddhism has been quietly pointing toward for thousands of years, is something warmer and more honest than that. It is the peace of a mind that knows itself, that can watch a toxic thought arrive without panicking, that can lose focus and return without self-punishment, that can sit inside uncertainty without needing to immediately escape it. That kind of peace is not something you achieve once and keep forever. It is something you choose, again and again, in the small and ordinary moments of an ordinary life, and it is completely, genuinely available to you. You have learned that the mind is not your enemy, it is simply untrained. That thoughts are not facts, they are passing weather in a sky that was always bigger than any storm. That awareness is not a technique, it is your most fundamental nature, always present, always clear, always waiting beneath whatever the mind was doing on the surface. That letting go is not weakness, it is the most intelligent and courageous thing a tired person can do. And that none of this transformation happens in a single moment of insight, it happens in the daily, humble, beautiful practice of returning, of showing up, of choosing, one more time, to be present with your own life, instead of at war with your own mind. Take that with you, not as information, as something you actually live. 5 minutes of quiet in the morning before the world gets loud. One conscious breath before you follow a toxic thought into its familiar spiral. One moment of honest noticing instead of automatic reacting. These are not small things. These are the exact things that slowly, permanently rebuild a mind from the inside out. The storm that brought you here was real. The exhaustion was real. The pain of living inside a mind that felt impossible to quiet, that was real too. But so is this moment, this stillness, this breath you are taking right now, in a mind that, perhaps for the first time in a long time, feels just a little bit clearer than it did before. You were never as lost as the thoughts told you that you were, and you are more capable of peace than you have ever been given permission to believe. The journey doesn't end here, it begins here, and this time you know the way. If this video found you at the right moment, comment "peace" below. That's all. Just let me know it reached you. And if you're ready to keep going, keep healing, keep coming back to yourself, then like and subscribe, because this is only the beginning of where this journey goes.